Tales to Terrify.
Good evening. Come in, children of the night. I know you'll find a seat. You know your way around the summer dark of the Nook by now. I'm thinking about Ray Bradbury tonight. As you probably know, Ray died last week, a couple of months shy of his 92nd birthday. Here's just a very short clip from somebody's bio of him on the web. Bradbury was a reader and writer throughout his youth, spending much time at the Carnegie Library in Waukegan, Illinois. He used this library as a setting for much of his novel Something Wicked This Way Comes, which was turned into a film, and subsequently broadcast on radio with Orson Welles adding a narration to the film's soundtrack. Ray was 6 when he left Waukegan, so I don't know how accurate that is. What I am about to say is not from his bio. When that library in Waukegan opened a room to his memory, they asked him to come to the dedication. They wouldn't pay his way or put him up for the night. Ray spoke harshly of them. He could be prickly. I've never lived in a world without Ray Bradbury, so I don't know how it'll be. I suspect we'll survive, but it'll be a world diminished by his absence, but incomparably enriched for his having been with us for so long and so productive a time. 1920 to 2012. We met twice. We drank together. We talked. He told me stories. Stories I already knew because I'd read them. Stories I didn't know. He told me that when he was 12 and at a carnival, a sideshow performer named Mr. Electro at the end of his act reached out and touched Ray with a static electric wand and in a crackle of ozone called out, "Live forever!" Yes, well, I'd heard that. I'd read it. I knew it. But hearing it from him over a glass of wine, well, that of course confirmed it. He was fond of spreading his arms. He was fond of embracing people and calling out, "My children!" It was a sudden, wondrous bewilderment for me to be one of his children. I don't know when exactly I first heard his voice. Not from his throat, but from his mind by way of his fingertips, tapping out the world as he saw it with those seer's eyes, and feeling it with that poet's heart, framing the night and starlight and the magics past and the wonders yet unseen, and bringing them to us. The radio. I was born in those years before television was a commonplace. Even after our first set took up residence along the side wall of our living room, I received the world on Pop-Up's old radio that I had inherited, and which, having taken his place as the bringer of tales, the reader of stories, glowed and winked a green eye at me out of the darkness of my room. That's where I first heard Ray's voice. On Suspense, Lights Out, Escape, Radio City Playhouse. He was everywhere. And every time I heard his name, I knew it was time to darken, pull up the covers, pull them over my head, and listen to the voice from out there. Out where the dragons were, out where nothing was sure, but where... When I was a kid, Ray's work was everywhere kids were. Radio, comic books, my 10-cent journal of the American way, television later, science fiction and horror shows, suspense, tales of tomorrow. Oh, and I am sorry for you if you weren't around for that era. Others, monster movies, The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, It Came from Outer Space. He even appeared on Groucho Marx's faux quiz show, You Bet Your Life. The night that happened, I was 12, and in our dining room, my office at the time, my brand-new Remington typewriter was tapping out a play on the Flash Gordon serials that my friends and I were going to present at 5th and Spring grade school. And I heard the name Ray Bradbury from the living room. "And what job do you do, Mr. Bradbury?" Groucho asked. I can't do Groucho. "I'm a writer," this Bradbury said. "Writer. Pony Express or what? I dashed in, and there he was, Ray Bradbury, the maker of so many dreams, 35 years old. He had written already Fahrenheit 451, The Martian Chronicles, many other things. He had already done the adaptation of Moby Dick for John Huston. Ray Bradbury, the maker of so many dreams. Well, Groucho pretended he didn't know who Ray was. He made jokes about his life and work. Waukegan, that's where Jack Benny's from. Did you know him? That kind of thing. That was a whale of a job about his screenplay for Moby Dick. In the contest, Ray and his partner answered questions on movie titles. They went on to answer everything except the last question, which halved their take to about $150. Oh, well, I didn't know that last one either. I went back and I finished the play, annoyed at Groucho, didn't know who Ray Bradbury was. Well, I was a credulous young fellow. 12. 12. It's the perfect age. It's the age I've stayed. The age I always figured Ray stayed. Now, you have to remember that at age 12, I believed that writers occupied a place maybe in the world, but maybe in some other part of creation. First of all, so many of them were dead. Jules Verne was dead, Bram Stoker was dead, H.G. Wells, Cripes, even Edgar Rice Burroughs was dead. The ones that weren't, if they had flesh, that flesh existed in a space far apart from the places where my friends and I grubbed about, out in the alley, down at the rail yards by the Schuylkill River. Now and then, when we looked up from the mud, we caught glimpses of them. And here, on that kinescope black and white and gray place across the room from where my parents sat, was one of the gods of being, with Groucho. Yes, that was all right, but with an ordinary person, a little old lady plucked from the mud to stand between the two pillars of creation, Groucho and Ray. Well, I started reading science fiction when I was in the 3rd grade. I was about, 8 or so. So when I began reading Ray in print on page, without panels, pictures and balloons, and gathering him into my heart by eye and brain and not by ear and gut, I never really considered him a science fiction writer. He did future stuff, yes. He went to Mars, sure. Well, his Mars was not the Mars of astronomy. That much I knew. Dinosaurs and time travel, well, there was little science there either. His beasts were creatures of wonder and awe, and his machines, of joy. His rockets flew out of wishes and into dreams. It was not a surprise to me, then, to hear Ray affirm the negative when he was asked, "Are you a science fiction writer?" We knew that all along. His science was that of a 12-year-old boy with sorcerer's sensibilities. I was in London on May 3rd, 1968. I had just returned to England, being home to bury my parents. I returned to a new job as an actor for the U.S. Air Force. A new city, London, a new flat, 27 Clarendon Road, W11. And not least, a brand new stereo amplifier and Sony tape deck, the fire and poetry of Sony sound. Remember that? Yeah, I had just plugged the whole thing together, turned it on, and this is what I heard.
That is human. So, too many eyes have I, too many limbs, too many fingers, too many years, but still we're the same. Now, Ishmael, shall I grind your bones to make my bread? Or shall we be friends?
Friends. Yes, friends, I think. And friends we were. Two terrible and fine, ugly and beautiful children of nature.
Fast as I could, I pressed the record button, and I caught probably a good 90% of the show. And what followed was an hour and a quarter of auditory wonder. Leviathan 99, Ray's take on Moby Dick, poetry and sounds such as I had never heard from a radio. Remember, America pretty much ditched the notion of drama over the radio in the 50s. We had bright moments, sure, then radio faded into wall-to-wall sales pitches interspersed with rock and roll and a few other things. And now I was hearing this.
But sometimes, at 3 in the deep morning, standing watch, I heard the captain pass in the elevator vent like a long-drawn whispering and sigh. Or heard him take the airlock door outside alone, there to stand sentinel to all space, to walk with magnetic boots upon the sounding flesh of our ship under the stars.
Hist! There he is!
Again, every mid-watch of this hour.
What does he do out there? Play ball with the meteors. Inhales the infrared, exhales the ultraviolet.
No, he doesn't trust our radars. Even blind, he thinks he sees better.
But what's he looking for?
Well, you can read his mind. What?
My mind may hear, but the captain's mouth must speak for him. When he finds what he is looking for, he'll let us know.
You read his mind. You don't like what you see. I can tell by your face.
There he goes. Walk, Captain. Stand guard. Protect us from the universe.
Logbook entry. 50 days out from Earth. We...
Young man?
Mr. Redley, sir.
Don't jump, boy. Do you know the past 5 minutes you have stared at that door?
Well, sir, the captain's there. I thought 50 days. Well, isn't that a long while for him to stay shut in?
How long is short to him, boy?
Such loneliness would drive me mad.
Yes? Well, there are some who savor madness all their days. It is the cud and titbit of their life. They would not know what to do with themselves if they could not nibble round the thin grey circumference of their skull, peeking and gaping from all the sockets, wondering at the cracks, assaying the guilt, rendering out the wonder.
Yes, but does he ever eat?
His soul is marrow enough. Let him feed, boy.
I have this urge to knock upon his door.
Give it a try. No, bang it. There.
Does he never answer then?
If he knew God were out there, he might stroll out for a chat. But you or me, boy, do your chores. Do your chores.
Hear this. Captain's inspection. All hands, inspection.
He's coming out.
The captain! Don't stand there, idiot! Line up!
Mr. Redley, all present, sir. The temperature has gone up 3 degrees in this cabin. All present indeed. Here's one who runs a very furnace of youth. The name?
Sir, Ishmael Honeycutt Jones.
Oh. Isn't that the sound of Blue Ridge Wilderness or the scarred hills of Jerusalem? Now, Ishmael, what do you see that I don't see?
I saw a man tall in stature and tall in years. Not old, but with oldness skinned over him. A prime unprimed by lightnings. His face white, hair white, hands white, uniform white, all everything cut from the same nothings. This was our blind captain who led us toward the stars. Behind his dark Firefly machine radar electric glasses, I knew if I seized them off, I would find eyes the color of minted silver of fish that had been born, lived, and died in the deep night. white. The man was white, all white, to match the whiteness of his much affrighted soul. I felt some years ago the universe had shot off a photographic flash. God blinked and bleached the captain to this color of sleepless nights and lonely terror. His heart did not beat so much as run down eternal panics. Hamlet's father's ghost stood here astride our lives and breathed out further ghosts.
How runs a ship in space, men?
With tight seams and oxygen suits at the ready, sir.
Well said. And how do you treat with a meteor, men?
Our 5-second patch job and all hands saved, sir.
Then, how do you swallow a flaming comet whole, men? No answer.
We have not as yet seen comets on the breakfast menu, sir.
You have not.
And then, Captain, mustn't you kill a comet before you can eat it?
True. And they do not make nightly strolls through our basement half of the universe, and yet...
Sir?
They do come by. Ridley.
Sir?
This star chart here, now. You with good eyes see. From the region of the Horsehead Nebula, among a billion lights, one special light shows forth. Blind, I feel its spectral presence. Thus. Do I touch the maelstrom, Ridley?
You do.
Closer now. So, not a meteor, a moon, a world. Who'll name it?
Sir, that is a comet.
Comet? No. A vast exhalation of mystery upon the deeps. A pale bride with flowing veil come back to bed her lost unbedded groom. Isn't she lovely, men? A holy terror to the sight.
Captain, is that not the comet which first passed Earth some 30 years ago?
Leviathan.
Speak up.
The comet Leviathan, the largest in history.
Leviathan. The great numb terror, the brute chemistry and the universe thrown forth in light and trailing nightmare. Yes. Leviathan.
Was it not Leviathan, Captain, that put out your eyes?
To give me greater visions? Yes. Leviathan, I saw it close. I touched the hem of its great billion-mile-long bridal veil. I circled round the shimmering abyss of snow gone lost in space, and then that virgin whiteness, jealous of my loving glance, rubbed out my sight 30 years ago. I see it still upon my inner lids, bunked down at night, so passing strange, so full of arctic miracles, that huge white rushing thunderhead of God. It brought me running. I offered up my fevered soul, all bright. It snuffed me out. Yet now I rub my bones to kindle me again, for look. Leviathan returns.
Over drinks years later, Ray told me that when he adapted Moby Dick for John Huston, he wanted his friend Christopher Lee to play Ahab. Huston and Ray showed his prickly side whenever Huston's name was mentioned. Huston passed on the idea and went along with a badly miscast Gregory Peck playing the haunted captain of the Pequod. Then a few years later, after fussing about with it for a bit, Ray wrote this.
We shall rest, Mr. Ridley, at the dead heart of the comet. We shall fight free of this calm, rejoin time on a proper footing, seek, and finally destroy.
Oh, Lord, if I were sure of murdering you as you of murdering it, which will at last do murder to us all.
The sweet calm was over. We fought the storm of time in space. and freed ourselves of Roman legions on a Dartmoor wilderness, lost Waterloo, missed final chance to watch Napoleon soldiers pock the Sphinx's old Egyptian face with rifle fire, and broke free to find the comet.
There. I feel it. It is there, yes. Is it?
It is.
All hands stand by the emergency light rocket craft. You know the engines of destruction there. In each I've built a sweeping hunger to devour that thing. A beam more powerful than any laser ever built. Wider, longer, swifter. Use that power. Worry the beast. Lay him to waste.
The comet approached, and it was a great white holy terror that filled up all the universe and put out every star. And Quell awakened from his trance, and every man of proper will dropped their masks and took on madness. All human flesh was gone. Red blood was all that moved our ship. The comet loomed. We ran as children run to happy games.
Light craft 1. Launch. Light craft 2. Launch. Mr. Redley, take command. This rocket is yours. Boy, stay behind. Well, you come with me.
Well, you put on that black metal.
The suit, yes, with the death symbols on it.
Let me go with you.
Stay and live. You will live, I know, to be very old. Be happy, Ishmael. Good friend. Goodbye.
Oh, Quell. We moved. The 3 small life ships moved to cross that moving path of raw destruction. All was white now. We fell as in the great mouth of the sun. Well,
I hear you, friend.
destroy and be destroyed. Like mice who nibble at one wave of milky sea, their laser beams all shrieking, but made small by greater shrieks of light-year maddened beasts now gone insane. The comet swept them up and turned them roundabout in time. The first storm seemed the merest bubble burst upon the edge of greater hurricanes of interstellar night. The ships now, one by one, fell down, plucked free of skins, their metal skeletons revealed, the men tossed out in mill-race radiation. Flashing meteors eroded, baked, swallowed, vanished in the all-encompassing light. Each man thrown to a different warp in time. The men in Lifecraft One, their weapons still, hurled down to death, perhaps in burials, with King Richard on his plane, the crown lost at his feet. The men in Lifecraft Two spun further on to drop in open grave with Yorick's skull, or near the tomb in Illinois where Lincoln dreamt away. I do not know. The captain last. Through Quell, I heard his cry.
Was the weapons gone, my men dispersed? Why then I have these hands? Blind I feed on you, gone dead I grapple you. Where is your heart? There I'll die for it. Oh, damn Leviathan, it comes to this!
I was tossed forth myself. Alone I watched as now at last the whiteness went its way. With gibbering voice off down the long black mine shaft of the universe, its bridal veil trailing despairs and woes, celebrating itself, a mindless mystery forever in motion. Vanishing. An echo.
gone.
He wrote this space-age poem to give Christopher Lee the part Houston had denied him. Once recorded on my tape machine in England, Leviathan 99 became kind of an entertainment centerpiece for dozens of gatherings at my place in London, then later in the States. Gatherings of friends, beer and herbal delight, and the silence of still, awed listening. You know, the wow variety. Well, on it went, until, as such things do, the tape vanished during a move. I tried to replace it, but that was years before such things were easily done. Anyway, during my first face-to-face meeting with Ray, we had drinks at a restaurant near here, now, alas, also gone. I told him the story, the getting and the losing of Leviathan 99. He told me the story of his writing it and said a few warm words about Houston, then said, "Call me in Los Angeles in a few days." He had a tape copy of the show, something the BBC had given him, and he'd send it to me for me to copy. "Make sure you send it back, though," he said. "It's the only one I've got." And I did, and he did, and I recorded it, and I sent it back. And I was unbelieving. By then, see, I'd gotten accustomed to the idea that writers were reasonably human. I'd been to a few conventions, I'd met a few heroes of note. I'll not list them, but this was a gift of trust from Olympus. Ray and I met one more time on another visit. I had had an invitation to visit him in L.A. if I ever got out there again. Alas, I never did. Never did. We spoke on the phone many times, and we wrote to each other. We exchanged greetings at holidays. Oddly enough, that's how we began our actual relationship, on the telephone. I was working with the Organic Theater here in Chicago, and we were preparing to do an adaptation of one of his novels, and being the literary manager, dramaturg, and I had to talk to him, and we spent many an hour chatting back and forth. It started our conversation. So, we exchanged greetings at holidays. When my first novel, Just North of Nowhere, came out in 2007, I sent him a copy. By then, I'm afraid Ray's eyesight was nearly gone, so I guess I should have sent him a tape. I didn't, alas. So, will I miss him? Of course. But, you know, I already had missed him. Fiction. Fiction tonight comes to us from Mr. Martin Mundt. You remember Marty. He inaugurated Tales to Terrify, 22 shows ago. Wow. The very first, before Joe Lansdale, before Gene Wolfe or Stephen King, we had Martin Mundt. Those guys I mentioned are a good reason for doing this show, but Marty represented one of the reasons I agreed to do it. Here's Marty reading
The Time I Didn't Meet Christopher Walken by Martin Mundt. I'd just gone into the 7-Eleven, the one right down the street from where I live, on the corner maybe half a block away. I go there pretty regularly, so I had no reason to expect that this trip would be any different from any other trip, but on that particular day, and I don't even remember anymore exactly what I'd gone there for, but on that particular day, in that particular place, I found the metaphysical intersection of all days and all places. I found truth. And by the end of the story, you'll see what I mean. So anyway, I walked in, and I don't think I'd even stepped off the floor mat onto the tile before these two guys charged through the door behind me. The first one practically pulled my shoes off by stepping on my heels, he was so close and in such a rush. I don't know how I could have missed seeing them outside, but I did somehow. I often think now how my life would have been changed had I seen them, had I not gone into the 7-Eleven. But I didn't, and I did, and I don't know if any change would have been for the better or the worse. So anyway, the first guy through the door wore these big baggy jeans, just long enough to cover his knees and so wide they made his calves look like chicken bones. He wore a huge T-shirt emblazoned with the logo of some video game or rip-rap music band. I think there was an eye and a woman and definitely a knife, maybe a motorcycle, or a Stairmaster with tires. A word floated in and around the images, but the letters were tangled and intertwined with each other like the branches of bare trees, so I couldn't read it. I don't know what the young people listen to or watch these days, so I can't identify it any more exactly than that. The guy was in his mid-20s, and he had shaved his head, leaving the scalp glossy, almost waxed. And he wasn't the kind of guy who should have shaved his head either, at least not in my opinion, since he had a profusion of angles in his skull, like he'd spent his years as an infant standing on his head on a waffle iron. He wore a boomerang-shaped kukri knife stuffed into his belt, a heavy, foot-long blade at least, a style of weapon native to the Indian subcontinent. His personality seemed neatly encompassed by the blade, crooked, dangerous, and as intelligent as brightly honed steel. It stuck out of his belt as if he himself came equipped with a handle, the better to be easily gripped and wielded by others. The second guy through also wore the short, baggy jeans. I guess it must be the style these days. But instead of a T-shirt, he wore a black wife-beater, the better to display the many tattoos covering his shoulders and arms. Most of the tattoos, like Wafflehead's logo, flowed into unrecognizable shapes as far as I could tell, but one I remember with perfect clarity. He had a photorealistic reproduction of his driver's license tattooed across his sternum, in a Gothic script that looked as if each letter had been cut out of a Gutenberg Bible and then pasted together like a ransom note. He had a goatee and sideburns below his chin in both the license photo and in real life. According to the license, his name was Dexter Roby. "This is a robbery," he yelled. Did I mention they carried guns? Automatic pistols so big they looked more like clubs than firearms. Well, the guy behind the counter and I had already figured out the robbery part, from the drawn guns, before Dexter had even said a word. Oh, and I think you will have noticed from my description so far that neither of them wore a mask, or any sort of disguise. I began to sense a grave and probably dangerous lack of planning in this robbery, which might lead to their downfall. Unless, of course, they planned on leaving no witnesses. At that moment, I began to regret my trip to the 7-Eleven. "This is a robbery," Dexter yelled. Again. You should understand, I only repeat this because he repeated it. I don't know why he repeated it. Perhaps he wanted to make sure we didn't think he and Wafflehead were there to sell their pistols to us. And now, of course, I will never know. So anyway, Wafflehead shoved his gun in my face, holding it tipped over on its side like in the movies, and said, "Don't move." I hadn't moved up to that point, and I saw no reason to start, so I did what he said. He smiled. I remember one gold and many yellow teeth, and then we all stood there for a few minutes, not moving. They didn't pursue their advantage. I don't know why. Maybe they had expected resistance, or heroics, or guard dogs, or a 16-ton weight falling on their heads when they entered. I can't say for certain, but once again I detected the whiff of poor planning. Or maybe they were just the kind of people who didn't know how to handle success, in which case I could sympathize with them. Anyway, that's when Christopher Walken walked in. You know Christopher Walken, the star of Pennies from Heaven, Prophecy, and Annie Hall. Raise your hands if you know him. Don't be self-conscious. Good. Well, I want you to picture him in your minds. I want you to summon up all your memories of him right now. Everything. The way he looks, the way he smiles, the cadence of his speech, his particular personal scent, if you are familiar with it. I want you to feel the beat of his heart under the skin of his wrist, and then I want you to put all of that life right into your cerebral cortex, right between your eyes, front and center, and in the now. I want you to do all that while I'm telling you this story. I want you to filter the Christopher Walken of my story through the living, breathing, glowing aura of pure personality that you've just conjured up in your minds, and let the colors and textures of your own personal Christopher Walkens suffuse your experience of my story. Can you do that? Good. Then back to the story. He walked in, and he stepped between Dexter and Wafflehead so close that he brushed the matte black muzzle of Dexter's pistol as he passed, and which he seemed not to notice at all. He wore a gray suit and a white French-cuffed shirt unbuttoned at the neck. A neon blue tie dangled from his jacket pocket, as bright as an arc of electricity sparking across the gray fabric. And his hair. How do I do justice to his hair? His hair perched on his head like a small prize-winning dog waiting for a treat, all the time radiating the thrill of anticipation, attuned to the vibrations of the universe, perfect in its tonsorial imperfections. Envy was not even possible when confronted with such lush and luxuriant and unique hair, only admiration. I thought Wafflehead might start crying for what could have been. Anyway, he passed between Dexter and Wafflehead and went straight to the counter, passing close by me, and I can tell you that I am now privileged to know, from first-hand experience, Christopher Walken's personal scent. He smelled of rainbows, and of love, and of the sea. I can describe it no better. I felt lightheaded upon inhaling his subtle but intoxicating scent, but I forced myself to remain focused. He stopped at the counter, but didn't speak. Instead, he glanced at all the impulse buys spread around the register. You will have noticed by now that the logic of our situation, by which I mean the robbery, you remember the robbery, don't you, had begun to unravel. Dexter and Wafflehead had begun with a frayed and tattered rag, to be sure, but now it began to fall to pieces right in their very hands. Because we couldn't take our eyes off Christopher Walken. The robbery now became a secondary or tertiary consideration at best, its importance quickly fading to complete insignificance. Decisions and actions that had seemed vital, even life-defining only moments before, now seemed only the shadows of life, lines written by others, parts played and then left scattered upon a stage. Christopher Walken was the actor, and yet we were the ones stumbling over our lines and missing our marks. He seized life, the now, the moment. We had stared what we thought were the ultimate questions of life and death in the face until he ripped our attention away from petty bullets and blood and death to himself. "How much is gum?" he said to the clerk. The question sounded like a test, filled with hidden meanings and secret possibilities. The clerk hesitated, suspicious, not wanting to give an incorrect answer, and then whispered, "Depends on which gum." Christopher Walken thought about that. We could all see him working the information around and around inside his head. He is an actor. He displays his internal life on his face like tattoos from one to another for all of us to see. None of us could take our eyes off him as he mulled over the clerk's answer. His lips moved, and we trembled on the verge of revelation. An eyebrow arched, and we held our breath. The eyebrow relaxed, and we sighed in relief. A cheek ticked, and we cringed in sudden fear. One eye squinted, and we spun, dizzily cast adrift from lifelong certainties. He ran his right hand over his hair and down the back of his neck, replacing one type of perfect tonsorial imperfection with another. And then he seized a package of gum with one hand so fast it was as if he had had the package in his hand from the moment he had entered the store. I gasped. Dexter flinched. Wafflehead merely blinked, his mouth hanging open. "How about this one?" he said, holding the gum up for the clerk to see. 69 cents, said the clerk. He said it half as a question, almost as if he thought that a thing he knew to be a fact could somehow be wrong. And then a look of panic exploded in his eyes as he realized that he was wrong. "And tax," he hurried to add. Christopher Walken put the gum back. "Thank you," he said, and he turned around. We watched. No TV or movie screen diluted the power of his presence. Rainbows and love and the sea walked past me a second time. He turned into the snacks aisle, and suddenly I too became interested in snacks. And so did Dexter. I saw it in his eyes, in the tensing of his muscles, as if he could hardly keep himself from following. Wafflehead merely salivated down his chin. He mesmerized us. All I can say is that he is a celebrity for damn good reason. He stopped, picked up a 99-cent bag of potato chips, held it up to his ear, and shook it. His expression soured. He didn't like what he heard, and our mood soured as well. We didn't like what he didn't like, regardless of why. We didn't know why, and we didn't care. He replaced the bag on the shelf and picked up the next, shook it, and listened to the chips rattle inside as if he were listening to the tumblers of the combination lock to the gates of heaven. But the sounds of this bag, too, failed to woo his interest, failed to yield up to him whatever a bag of chips was supposed to yield up to him. He put it back. I mentally cursed the chip manufacturer for his clearly defective product. We began to get nervous. What would happen if he didn't find what he was looking for? Would our lives never be the same again? He shook a third, then a fourth, then a fifth bag. He shook every single bag of potato chips on that shelf, regardless of brand or flavor, but only the 99-cent bags and not the corn chips or the Cheetos or the Doritos. Does all of this strike you as odd? I can understand that, but you weren't there under his spell. And think about this. We watched him shake every single bag of 99-cent potato chips on the shelf. We held our collective breath while we waited for each successive decision he made about the mysterious, elusive sounds of shaken potato chips, as if those decisions might somehow fill a yawning void in us, in our own souls, when and if he found what he was looking for. My God, how I yearned to know exactly what he was listening for. My soul groaned, empty with a hunger that I felt only the right potato chips could fill. Dexter and Wafflehead stopped pointing their pistols, their arms hanging limp at their sides. Mystification glazed their eyes. What the hell was he doing? He is a celebrity. I cannot stress that enough. What he did mattered, no matter what it was. His actions were important because he was a celebrity. We all felt it. He compelled our fascination. He placed meaning inside every one of those bags by his actions and reactions. Hope blossomed inside each of our hearts as he picked up each bag, and disappointment crushed our hearts when he rejected it. Our lives disappeared into his life. Our concerns faded. He reached inside our souls and replaced our aspirations with his. And then he finished with the bags and came back to us empty-handed, as if he had walked out onto the shimmering waves of a tumultuous lake and now returned to us from where we had been unable to follow. He looked at each of us in turn as if for the first time. "What on earth was I looking for?" he said, looking into each of our eyes one after another. "Potato chips?" said Dexter. Yeah, potato chips," said Wafflehead, his chin glossy with spittle, and then he squinted and sucked and shook his head. No, not potato chips, not potato chips. Something else, something else inside the potato chips, like a prize or something. Yeah, that's it, a prize, right? And then Christopher Walken looked into my eyes. "I don't know," I said. He grinned. "That's good," he said. And I felt stupidly pleased that I had managed to be clever in front of Christopher Walken. "Because," he said, "I don't know what I was looking for either." He winked at me, still grinning. "But I'll know it when I find it." And then he looked past us at the register. The clerk had disappeared. The door behind the counter into the back room was ajar. Christopher Walken picked up the same pack of gum as before, then looked right and left behind the counter, holding the gum, waiting for the non-existent clerk to ring him up. After a moment, he turned to us again. "How much is tax, do you think?" he said. "No," Wafflehead screamed, shaking his head. I imagined cobwebs breaking apart and drifting across the vast, empty wastes of his brain. "No, it's a prize." His existential howl seemed to shake Dexter out of his reverie. His eyes focused for the first time since Christopher Walken had entered. "This is a robbery," he yelled, raising his pistol. "A prize," wailed Wafflehead like a maimed howler monkey. "Like Cracker Jack." His mind had tasted and then spit out the concept of knowing what he didn't know, being the beginning of wisdom. He did not want abstractions. He could comprehend only little plastic toy whistles and guns. He jerked his pistol up, pointing it at Christopher Walken. Danger and dread flooded back into my brain. My medulla swelled as it prepared to take over my actions, but I didn't care for my own self-preservation. The first thought that flashed across my mind, even as adrenaline was dumped into my bloodstream like a toxic mixture of hydrofluoric acid and amyl nitrate, was to throw my body between the gun and Christopher Walken. I almost welcomed the threat and the honor of sacrificing myself for a celebrity. But Christopher Walken proved faster than any of us. He snatched the kukri knife out of Wafflehead's belt so fast and so unexpected that I don't think any of us even realized exactly what he had done until the blade began to cut, and then two hands, each holding a pistol, thumped to the floor, and two tattooed stumps pumped out sprays of blood. But he didn't stop there. The knife kept flashing through the air so fast it was as if the blade flew of its own accord, like a killer hummingbird, slashing and hacking through flesh and bone as easily as if Dexter and Wafflehead had been made of nothing more substantial than origami, so sharp and fast that blood didn't even stick to the steel. He did things to them with that knife that I didn't think were humanly possible. Let me be clear about what I mean here. I never for a moment imagined that a human being who had feelings, which could even tangentially be called human, who had ever had even a stray feeling, however faint, however fleeting, which could be called in any way compassionate, could possibly do the things he did to another human being. In fact, I maintain that he went about his business with that knife like a super-intelligent robot insect god. And then I blinked and it was done. Dexter and Wafflehead lay in unintelligible anti-jigsaw pieces on the floor. Christopher Walken gripped their decapitated heads, one in each hand, Dexter hanging by a fistful of hair, and Wafflehead upended as if he were a bowling ball, the kukri buried up to its hilt in his neck. My adrenaline thudded to a stop. "I don't like guns," he said. "But knives," he shrugged. "Knives are okay. Now go on, get out of here. I'll take care of all this." And then he winked at me again and grinned. His eyes twinkled, as did the drops of bright red blood splattered across his grin. What could I do? I started to leave, but before I reached the door, he spoke to me one last time. "Oh," he said, "one more thing." I didn't turn around. "You don't know me," he said. "I wasn't here." I couldn't speak. I wondered why the kukri hadn't finished me, too. I was still a witness. "You're welcome," he said. I nodded and walked out the door. I read every word in every newspaper for days. I watched every news show on TV that I could. I listened to the radio. I searched the internet, but nothing. I never found any mention of Dexter, or Wafflehead, or any problem of any kind at any 7-Eleven, including the one down the street from where I live, or about Christopher Walken and a kukri knife. Go, look for yourself. You'll see. There's nothing. Not a mention of the incident exists anywhere. But I know that somewhere out there in the city, somewhere in the quiet basement of an old, decrepit factory, or in an empty lot on a lonely street of condemned houses, or at the bottom of a sluggish sewage canal, or in the corner of an old abandoned rail yard under a pile of forgotten railroad ties, lie two unmarked graves. Graves filled by Christopher Walken. Or maybe more than two somewhere, for all I know. Who can say? Not me. All I can say is that he taught me a powerful truth, that celebrity possesses an energy, a vitality, a chi, if you will, that can be terrifying in its naked power to stupefy or uplift or kill. I was lucky. I was uplifted. But be careful if you are ever confronted with a celebrity outside of the public spotlight. Touch that energy if you must, but touch it with reverence and awe and humility, or else... Well, let me just leave it at or else. Because celebrities are not like you and me. They are much better, and much, much worse. Oh, and by the way, Christopher Walken never cut two men to pieces with a kukri knife in the 7-Eleven down the street from where I live, saving my life in the process, because I don't know him, and he wasn't there. Treat this entire story as nothing but a metaphor, or a parable, or even a treatment for a film, because, in fact, I know nothing at all about Christopher Walken, and that is the beginning of wisdom.
Marty actually read this for us several months ago. It was right after I heard him read it at a joint authors reading thing he and I did. I asked him if we could use it. He came over to the Nook, sat down, read it. I thanked him. He left, and I started to think. Well, you're an old theater TV guy, the thinking went. Why don't you see if you can, get a hold of Christopher Walken, see if he might be interested in reading this for us. At least, I reasoned, I could get him to read the 3 or 4 lines of dialogue the Christopher Walken character has in the story. Well, let me say this. The magic spread by the name Lawrence Santoro, or even Tales to Terrify, was apparently insufficient to get even a response from Walken's people. This allows me to maintain my warm and good feelings about Mr. Walken, and, of course, curse the names of his people. I guess that's what people are for. Oh, well, Marty's a good reader. It's just, he's not Christopher Walken. So, Ronnie, look, if you hear this some dark night, and if an antic disposition grabs you, feel free to contact me. I remember you from the wonderful John Acton days. You were a great kid. We can talk about that. You can read this story, and I'll cast it again, just for you. So, there we have it. A few thoughts about the loss of an old friend, and a new story from Martin Mundt. And so, off you go, into the night. The Time I Didn't Meet Christopher Walken may not be a terrifying tale, but it has a few moments of thrilling verbiage. It's a clever tale, it's fun, it's dark. Might be a bit of an antidote, So, next week, something utterly different. You'll like it. I know you will. But for now, up and doing. Have a walk in the heat. Feel summer on your skin, see the stars overhead. Feel the spring in your sneakers. They're alive. So are you. Dash home. Your feet will fly like Douglas Spaulding's did on that first day of summer in Greentown, Illinois, with a whole yard of dandelions to harvest, the wine to brew and store on the shelves in the cellar, and we'll drink them to your memory, Ray. So good night, and pleasant dreams forever.